the Korean War, Utah, and Jesse Ventura are all on this day. Welcome back to On This Day. Today's date is January 4th, 2022. It is the fourth day of the year. There are 361 days left in the year. It's the first Tuesday in the second week and the 15th day of winter, 75 days left until spring. If today's your birthday, your birthstone is a garnet. Today is National Trivia Day. National Trivia Day seeks to raise awareness about trivia and the facts, curiosities, and quotes that go along with trivia. This day aims to encourage people to share their knowledge in competitive ways, especially with games. I used to love Trivial Pursuit. That was like my favorite game back in the 80s and 90s. Played it all the time. Matter of fact, when I used to pull like a guard shift in the army, you couldn't be out there with a book, you're standing there waving people in or whatever. I used to put Trivial Pursuit cards in my pocket, and when no one was around, I'd just read them and learn. Really helped the time go by. Anyway, today's National Trivia Day. All right, let's see what else January 4th has given us. 1854, the McDonald Islands are discovered by Captain William McDonald. What are the chances of that? The dude is actually named McDonald and he finds some islands called McDonald. That is mind-blowing. Probably one of the biggest coincidences ever in history. I'm just kidding. He found them and they named him after him. 1896, Utah is admitted as the 45th U.S. state. 1944, during World War II, Operation Carpetbagger takes off. This is like the earliest version of what is now known as the Air Force's Special Operations. During World War II, they took bomber aircraft known as B24 Liberators, and they removed things like the belly gun, oxygen tanks, and other machine guns and things they didn't need, and the bombs. They would load them up like a cargo plane and drop out people like agents and supplies to resistance fighters in the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Germany, and obviously France, Italy, and a couple other places. They would take off from England at night, fly to a designated area with no contact from the ground, and they would look for 3 flashlights pointing up in a row. And then they would have a 4th flashlight pointing to the left or the right to let the bomber know where they should drop off the equipment. Now keep in mind, this is long before we had satellites and night vision goggles. These guys were flying bomber aircraft that were going faster than they were probably designed to go because it had half the weight that it normally would have if it was on a bombing run. And in most cases, they were hugging the terrain only a couple hundred feet off the ground to avoid radar and anti-aircraft guns. What really sucks is they were in enemy territory, these pilots and their crew, and after the drop, they would have to fly around the area, different spots and into enemy territory to disguise where they actually dropped off the equipment. When I was in the military, they kind of still did this tactic with helicopters. Like if you fly into a jungle area, the helicopters would come in, they'd land in a field, let a bunch of people off or not, and then fly to another field. They'd keep doing this about 4 or 5 times so that if anyone was watching with night vision goggles or something, they weren't really sure where the soldiers got dropped off at. But on the ground, they had agents and resistance fighters that would collect all the equipment and then go on to fight the German soldiers. It's easy to get resistance fighters when someone's invaded your country like Germany did. So people are in no short supply with an operation like this. The supplies are what's in short supply. And the United States and their allies did a pretty good job of supplying all these resistance fighters throughout the war. There's a pretty good video, it's an older one from like 1945 or whatever, that shows how this operation went down and the things they had to do. I'll leave a link for it down below. But this is in the days before we had foam and things like that to pack all the equipment in. They were using hay. So they'd put like medicine or glass bottles of things, and then they just pack it all with hay instead of foam like we use today or bubble wrap. Very interesting time. 1951, the Korean War. Chinese and North Korean forces capture Seoul. That was a bad time. 1959, Luna 1 becomes the first spacecraft to reach the vicinity of the moon. What's the vicinity of the moon? Anyway, Luna 1 became the first artificial object to reach the escape velocity of Earth. It remains in orbit around the sun between the orbits of Earth and Mars to this day. 1972, Rose Hillenbrand becomes the first female judge to sit at the Old Bailey in London. in the UK. 1989, the second Gulf of Sidra incident. A pair of Libyan MiG-23 floggers are shot down by a pair of U.S. Navy F-14 Tomcats during an air-to-air confrontation. Now, this one is really strange in a lot of different ways. So, the Gulf of Sidra is right off the coast of Libya in the Mediterranean Sea. It's really not a gulf, but it's called a gulf, and Libya decided, Muammar Gaddafi said that this is all Libyan territory, and anyone that comes near it will be attacked by the Libyan forces. So, as the US does, they went as close as they could. Two of these MiG-23s came towards the two F-14s that were flying to protect the USS John F. Kennedy, which is an aircraft carrier. So they were head on, as they call it. They were pointing their nose towards the F-14s and they were coming at them. The F-14s changed direction. So did the MiGs to keep coming at them. The F-14s changed direction again. The MiGs changed direction with them, so they kept going back and forth, aiming towards them. This went on 5 times. At the time, the rules of engagement said if someone does it more than 3 times, they could be fired upon. Well, they did it 5 times in total, so the F-14s fired on him, basically killed the 2 MiGs. One pilot ejected and survived, the other one died, the Libyans. Now, there's been some back and forth whether this was legit or not, and all this intelligence came out about it, and the US said, well, Libya had been making threats, so we just thought this was a threat, and they were coming at us. Others say that the Libyan jets were just going out there on a patrol to see what was going on. This happens all the time in air-to-air combat or air-to-air military stuff. The Russians get really close to us all the time. We get really close to them. Different countries do this. But the Libyans had been making threats, so this made them a little more dangerous. We weren't at a wait-and-see situation with them. In the end, there were a couple mistakes, like the pilots should have radioed back to get confirmation that they could fire on them, which they did, but they didn't get an answer. It was like a minute later they started firing missiles. In the end, it was investigated and just, determined that it was an incident, and the pilots weren't in the wrong. They could have done things better, but nobody really got in trouble. And I'm sure the Libyans tried to say that it was like a couple sightseeing planes filled with schoolgirls or something. They always had something like that going on. 1999, former professional wrestler Jesse Ventura is sworn in as the governor of Minnesota. Yeah, that happened. Premiered on January 4th, 1984, Night Court. Judge Harry T. Stone presides over the night shift of a Manhattan courtroom. This was a great show. They finally called it quits in 1992. They probably could have done more seasons, but it starred Harry Anderson, who was great in there. He played the judge. He's also a phenomenal magician and stand-up comedian. John LaRoquette, Richard Mole, Paula Kelly, and the late, great Markie Post. Markie Post was amazing. She was in so many different shows, started off in like the late 70s. She's on like Chips, Barnaby Jones, The Incredible Hulk, Lazarus, Buck Rogers, Heart to Heart, BJ and the Bear. She was pretty much on everything that was big in the 1980s and finally gets on Night Court. Even after it ended, she kept going. Matter of fact, Something About Married, she played Mary's mom. That actually finds Ben Stiller in there who'd zipped up his junk. Great movie. Sadly, Markie Post died this last August, 2021. You know what's really sad about this? Her Wikipedia page, for all that she's done, I mean, she was in so many different shows, there's like nothing to it. It lists all the things she was in, but not much else about her. I mean, she went to Lewis and Clark College out here in Portland, Oregon, but she was on Simon and Simon, McCain's Law, The Love Boat, The Fall Guy, Cheers, Fantasy Island, The A-Team. She was on so many different shows, and she's like a 1980s icon, and there's really not much to her. It's just kind of vacant. Some things, but not much. Born on January 4th, 1643, Sir Isaac Newton, English mathematician, astronomer, theologist, and author. He also built the first practical reflecting telescope. I actually heard someone say that he invented gravity one time. He didn't invent gravity. He did a lot of work on celestial mechanics and how the planet's orbits are affected by gravitation. Yeah, he invented gravity. It wasn't around until he showed up. I mean, we're just all floating around. Died on January 4th, 1999, Iron Eyes Cody, American actor and stuntman. He, back in the 1970s and 80s and probably even the 60s, he was on just about every Western show and he played an Indian. But he is probably most famous for a commercial he did. In the 1970s, when everyone was just throwing trash out their window and littering wasn't really something we worried about, we just did it. Throw trash out your window, leave your trash in the park. We didn't care about that stuff. So they did a program to teach people about how bad it is. And this shows this guy coming up a river, an Indian, on a canoe. And he gets off on this beach and it's just covered with trash. And he starts to cry. This was one of the most impactful commercials that was ever made. And it was Iron Eye Cody was the crying Indian. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a productive day, and be nice to each other. Don't litter.